Okay, today we're actually going to begin reading the Bible. Of course, before I do that, I'm going to have some opening thoughts. Yeah, you're a cat. Yeah, you be quiet. I'm going to do this. Whenever I start reading any given day, I usually have some sort of opening. Anyway, so when I do get started with these, I often go into some sort of explanation or some sort of when I'm starting a new book in particular, framing the background context and details about the book to help set the stage for it. This isn't particularly true. This is particularly important here as we're beginning this whole endeavor. And we begin reading through the first book of the Bible, Genesis. Now, I said in one of my previous videos that typically when I go through the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, I try to read the books roughly in the order in which I feel they were written. And this is true. This is my general approach. This is what I typically do. In this case, however, I'm actually going to be somewhat bending this rule right from the start because I don't actually believe that Genesis was... Oh no. I don't actually believe that Genesis was the first book written. Now, I do believe the works of Moses were the first material written that we now call the Bible. The Bible itself, just to set the table here before we get started, is not a book. It's a collection of books. It's actually more like an anthology. It's a collection of 66 in the Old Testament and New Testament put together the way that we have divided them in our current English copies you can find in stores today. It's a collection of 66 different books. Actually, really, we'll just call them books for a simpler word, for lack of a simpler word. That were compiled over the span of 1,500 or so years by dozens of different authors. Okay. Of course, God is the ultimate author of the Bible from beginning to end. So in that sense, there was only one author, but the human writers who he used to actually put these words down on pen on parchment were a number of them over the span of 1,500 plus years to result in the books that we now have divided into 66 separate categories in our table of contents in our Bibles today. I believe that Moses was in fact the first person to record anything written down that we have in our Bibles today. It's his books are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the first 5 books of the Bible. We also often refer to... I'm sorry, my troublemaking cat is just all over the place right now. And this is a troublemaker, and she's in a troublemaking mood. I can just tell it. I can see it in her eyes. So, I'll admit I'm very distracted right here because she's looking for trouble. I have a cat. My big fat lazy cat is over there doing nothing. I don't know where the scaredy cat is. And my troublemaker is looking for trouble, so I'm keeping an eye on her. Anyway, those are the works of Moses, undisputed in the ancient accounts that Moses wrote all 5 of those books. The rest of the Old Testament and the New Testament all take it for granted that Moses wrote those books. We'll discuss kind of in detail some of the authorial fingerprints that Moses left behind to help identify him as... Now, it's also important to point out that Moses lived in the 1400s BC, and the copies that we have of the scriptures today are not the copies that he actually wrote. What we have left over is a document that has been redacted or edited slightly by later editors, later compilers. I don't believe the meaning of the books has changed all that drastically, but I believe it is important to note that we don't actually have the authentic works of Moses any longer. At the end, the books of Moses themselves indicate that he only ever wrote one copy. We'll read as we actually... Now, this is going to be a while because this isn't until I'm going to read them in order from Genesis to Deuteronomy. This isn't going to be until the second half of this that we actually get into this. But It seems like Moses himself only ever wrote one copy and left it behind to the Israelites for them to have after he died. Well, that copy is long gone. Okay, whatever copy he wrote on and left with them when he died in the late 1400s BC is long gone. What we have now are copies of copies of copies of copies, and over the centuries, some of those copies were edited or updated slightly for various purposes. Now, again, I don't believe I'm not one of those. I am not one of those smart people. I call them the smart people. I'm not one of those 21st century smart people who thinks that all the books were kind of invented or made up near in the late BC era, at whatever time you want to call it. That's my. I don't know if you can hear it on the microphone, but that's my troublemaking cat. She's in the window right now. Oh, now she's trying to take down the curtains. Stop that. Be quiet. Anyway, just so you know, she is behind that curtain. Oh, she's not moving now. Oh, there she goes. She's behind that curtain over there, trying to find ways to cause trouble. Anyway, I am not one of the critics or the modern-day smart people who have a deep-seated desire to prove themselves smarter than everybody else by showing that the books were actually all made up in the 500s BC or something like that. I don't believe that. I do believe that they were compiled. The documents that existed at the time were compiled at a particular point in history, and we'll get to that. That will actually be in the days of King Josiah in the late 600s BC, and we'll get to that. Of course, I wouldn't even cover all the books because some of them had yet to be written at that point, but I do believe that happened, and I do believe that at that time certain changes were made to some of the texts. I don't believe it's anything particularly significant. I think the most significant changes probably have to do with some of the names that were swapped out. In particular, when we get to the beginning of the Exodus narrative, we're going to see a couple of city names that were swapped out for updated names at the time of, the final compiling or the final editing, and the names that Moses would have actually written. In particular, in Exodus 1, when it gets into the story of the Israelites becoming slaves in Egypt, it talks about a couple of cities that they were forced to build on behalf of Pharaoh. I believe the names that Moses originally wrote for those cities has been edited out of the text and was replaced with names of those cities from centuries later that would have been familiar to the people of the generation of the priest or prophet who edited the book into its final form that we have still today. And this causes problems because one of those names that we have in our text is Ramses. And so people assume that the Israelites are supposed to have built the store city of Ramses for a pharaoh named Ramses. So they assume then that the pharaoh Ramses was the pharaoh of the oppression at the beginning of Exodus, when he was not, in fact. And this causes humongous problems when it comes to dating the Old Testament and really dating ancient history in general. And that's a pretty significant problem, at least in our modern smart people's understanding today, that conflict between the histories of the Old Testament and what we think is the history of Egypt, which a lot of it is due to this misunderstanding of not realizing that the name written in Genesis of Ramses is not the name that Moses would have originally written there. That was edited and changed by a later priest or scribe. So anyway, so the point is that the document that Moses himself actually wrote is long gone. And what we have is a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy that at some point in time has some minor slight adjustments or even possibly additions. Like there's a line about Moses being the most humble man, or something about his death. Like there are a few things in there that Moses clearly didn't write, but we're going to take the authorship of Moses for granted for basically the entire first 5 books of the Bible, with a few exceptions being mentioned here and there, and we come to them. Now, so that is a given. Now, it's my contention that Moses lived in the 1500s, 1400s BC. In particular, it's my contention that the Exodus itself happened in either 1445 or 1446 BC. And so Moses was 80 at the time. He lived another 40 years afterwards. So his overall dates, I remember in BC times, you go backwards. are something like 1525 to 1405 or something like that BC. And that's a time period that Moses would have been alive during. So we'll round it off to say about 1500 or so BC. This actually puts Moses earlier in time than, again, going back to that chronology problem I mentioned earlier of getting the dates of the Exodus wrong. You'll commonly hear people say he lived in the 1300s or 1200s BC, but that is inaccurate. He lived in the 1500s and 1400s BC, so a few centuries earlier than what is often assumed by the smart people today. And I do believe that Moses was the first Bible writer. I actually believe that the first written words, anything that ended up becoming part of this that we have here today. I have a 21st century English bound New International Version Bible. I believe that the first words of anything that would become this were actually written by God himself in the form of the Ten Commandments when Moses went up to Mount Sinai while the Israelites were camped, or the Hebrews were camped there for a year after leaving Egypt. I believe that was the actual first written words. I have no proof of this. Okay, there's no way for me to establish definitively beyond any shadow of a doubt that this is actually true. It's just my belief. I believe that Moses wrote, I believe that the first written words, words written by a human author, were the words that Moses received from God while he was on Mount Sinai. Again, while the Israelites were camped at Mount Sinai for a year. That would have been originally the instructions needed to build the tabernacle and all the various pieces and instruments and items of clothing and things like that went along with their tabernacle worship system. Then it would have expanded from there, and that would have been the second half of Exodus, the book that we now call Exodus. No, Cat. She wants to cause trouble. She's got that look in her eyes. And that tail, the way that tail is moving. I know that. I know those signs. She wanted to pick a fight with the window a moment ago, but now she's looking at something else. Anyway, and so I believe, and so the second half of the book of Exodus talks about the instructions to build the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant and the priestly robes and all that stuff. And then Leviticus goes on and actually gives them the law, which they restate again in Deuteronomy. That's at the very end of Moses' life. I believe that material, the second half, what we would call the second half of Exodus and the book of Leviticus, is probably the first stuff that Moses actually wrote down. And I believe that it was after they left the camp at Sinai, which they stayed at for a year. And then they tried to go into the Holy Land the first time and were rebuffed, or failed, did not have enough faith to go in. And then they tried to take it by force without God's help, and they were chased away. Then they spent 40 years wandering in the desert, long enough for all the adults aged 20 and over to die out in that generation. And I believe it was during that time when Moses went back and wrote the history of the Hebrew people leading up to that point, which we would call Genesis and the first half of Exodus, which of course Moses himself would have lived through. So everything from Exodus to the end of Deuteronomy is Moses' own life. What are you doing, Cat? I want you to stop that right now. Go over there. Genesis, of course, takes place some centuries even before Moses, and I believe that he wrote that material, the Genesis account, during the year after they failed to go into the land for the first time, and during the years in between them going into the land the first and second times. So I believe, so that would be then between the years 1445 or 46 and 1406 BC, because that is the years of their wanderings, and so that somewhere, I believe Genesis was written sometime during that time. I actually believe that parts of the law, Leviticus, maybe the second half of Exodus, like I said, were actually probably written before that. I believe those may have been, I believe that was actually the first material probably written that we would call the Bible today. And like I said, I think the Ten Commandments that God gave to Moses on the mountain were probably the very, very, very first written words that ended up becoming part of our Bible today. But I'm not going to start with that, although there is a good reason maybe that we should. But just for the overall context of the story, going from beginning to end, it's easier really to start with Genesis. But I do want to mention and point out that Moses wrote all these books. Again, he was an eyewitness. Basically, his life story from Exodus to Deuteronomy. He was an eyewitness to all those things, and it's pretty much his autobiography in a sense. He's even told by God to write these things down as they're happening. Now she's picking a fight with the couch cushions. And then Genesis, of course, had to come from somewhere else. I know I said I was going to start reading. I do intend to start reading tonight before I get done recording, but this video is going on 17 minutes plus now, and time to take a break and start a new video.